Morning, Mike.
Good morning, Peter.
This is our first morning engagement together, and hopefully I'll stay awake for for the most of it. When we stopped talking last time, we kind of almost bizarrely came to sort of December the 31st, 1999, when you'd come back from your 3-month sabbatical where you went traveling around Europe, reading books and looking and deciding what you were going to do. And you came back. You'd been working for Method and Madness. You'd been running Method and Madness. This was your company. Just give us a sort of, just do a little recap on those last few months and your feelings.
Well, as you remember, my ambition was to have a company that would stay together for 3 years, and we would do X number of productions, create a repertoire. The point being that to try to prove that if you had an ensemble of talented people and you kept working together, the work would improve exponentially. Something special would happen. And we ended up doing 4 shows, but we were getting less and less bookings because the venues had become very commercial, totally disinterested in collaborating. They didn't want complicated offers of repertoires. What's the play you're doing now? How long is it? Oh, it's over 90 minutes. Does it have any telly names in it? It was all very depressing and discouraging. Anyway, we pressed on regardless, and reality sort of hit my ambitions when we simply weren't getting enough bookings to justify the existence of the company as it was. And, maintaining a company with 10 actors was quite an expensive enterprise. And we had to stop it. We had to stop the company and disband the actors, let them go after two years and, I don't know, 2.25 years, something like 20, it was about 20, actually it was less, only 20 months, which was a horrible situation, painful and, distressing for them because they'd committed themselves to all sorts of mortgages and things, thinking that they'd have a 3-year income. And so we did our best to compensate them as much as we could, I think, at the time. And we had to close the company, or disband the company, not close Shared Experience, but close the company, Method of Madness, but disband that company, which was a pity. And the work was getting really good. Those productions were excellent and getting better and better, particularly the last 2, the James Elroy and Phillips play, Buried Alive, and so forth. So, and I did tell you that the company themselves were determined to bring one of the shows into London, and themselves they organised a slot at the Young Vic, and so the Isaac Bashevis Singer production of those short stories, the Demons and Dybbuk's, was done at the Young Vic. And at that point I was exhausted, and I said to the board that I must have a break because I haven't literally had a holiday in about 3 or 4 years, no break whatsoever. And I was really very, very tired. And they agreed that I should take 3 months off and then come back and decide what else we do with the company, because the Arts Council had decided that nevertheless I was still a good thing and they'd like to keep the company going. Well, I explained that I wandered around Europe for 3 months, just looking at the view, looking into churches and art galleries and eating and sleeping and reading and deliberately not thinking about anything, which was wonderful. And then finally I ended up in Madrid for the last month. And I thought at some point, I really must make a decision. So I sat down and made a list of should I go on with the company, and as opposed to one saying, should I leave the company? And I'm afraid leaving the company was the one that took precedence, you know, because I couldn't see any way of changing the setup as it now existed. I couldn't see an alternative. You know, it would always be the same company, venues we'd have to go to, the same town. So what was the difference? And so I came back and regretfully handed in my notice. And my contract officially finished on December the 31st, 1999. So I woke up into a new century thinking, well, as one door closes, another opens. And that was a lesson I hadn't forgotten, because years and years ago, I'd had a very close friend from school, from Bradfield College, who wanted to go into the fashion business. And he worked for quite a commercial company for a long time. And then one day said to me, I'm going to leave here because if I stay here, I'll never go anywhere. I'm going to just stop and see if I can change direction. And I said, oh my God, but Clive, how can you do that? You know, you'll have no money. Ooh. And nevertheless, he did it. And within 6 months, he'd set up his own company, his own house, fashion house, and he became, in about a year, one of the what was then called the top 10 of English designers. And that was such a good lesson for me, that you don't cling to things that are not working. You take the break and take the risk, because things are always there. And I hadn't done that with Method and Madness, because it was all right and things kept going. And I guess I was feeling I'm at the age when it might be difficult for me to get another company. So I clung to that company, when actually my instinct should have said, look, you're not quite doing the work you want to do, with obvious exceptions, such as Philip's plays, and have the guts to take a break. Anyway, I did make that decision in December 31st, 1999, and woke up feeling very energized and purposeful, and thought, well, you know, I can always get some work. I can always teach. I don't have to do any more productions. I've done enough in my life. Maybe people have seen enough of Mike Alfreds' productions. And I felt quite buoyant. And sure enough, within a very short period of time, I got offered lots of work. One was going to Mongolia, which was very exciting. So, and, oh, excuse me. Big cut here. Unless you want to keep it in. Why not? And the phlegm. And so in that beginning period of the beginning of this century, I found I was working abroad again. And so chronologically, what I did, I went to Mongolia, which was quite wonderful, and did a 2-week workshop, and that was very successful, and it was a great experience, and very warm, very moving, and very warming. And maybe I'd like to talk about working abroad in more detail at some point, because I think it's incredibly interesting and proves something rather wonderful about theatre, I think. And then Mark Rylance, who was running the Globe, said, come and do a production. So I did Cymbeline for him. Now, Cymbeline had been one of my very successful productions in the first 5 years of shared experience. And I loved the play so much that it hadn't been in their repertoire. And I thought, why don't I try that again on a big stage? And I think the Globe stage was very, very thrilling. It had lots of potential, but I've never, well, or very rarely seen it used properly. People say, oh, it's a thrust stage, but in fact, it's more, there's more audience in front, the sides aren't very deep. And I thought it's much more like a no theatre or a kabuki theatre, very long and broad and very presentational, you see. And as I've often said, or I think I've often said, I love heightened productions as long as you can play them with great truth, you know, large and vigorous. And the Globe, and I learned a lot about the Globe. I sort of understood what that stage needed, is that the actors have to work with an extra degree of energy. They have to be able to cross a big space in, you know, in the same time they would move across a small intimate space, you know, and gestures had to be bigger, and you have the problem of the pillars to deal with and so forth and so on, and how to incorporate those into the production. Do you ignore them or acknowledge them? Do they become part of things? And what had happened with the Globe, it was meant to be more or less an empty stage. And directors, in their boring way, they kept sticking more and more set on it. And I thought, no, we're going to have an absolutely clean stage with nothing on it at all. And for people who don't know the Globe, it's heavily painted and decorated. The columns have got all sorts of decoration, and there are all sorts of figures and figurines sticking on the balustrades and things, which was probably authentic, and lots of colours. But at one point, the floor was full of colours, and it was very distracting. So we wrapped up as much of what the visual area of the stage so that it was clean. I even closed off the entrances, you know, so the actors were on stage all the time, which they were in the original production. And the only thing we had a small orchestra with a percussion player with a lot of percussion stuff hanging along the back wall. And we did Cymbeline. And it was great. It got wonderful reviews. Some people said it was the best production at the Globe up to that point, which was very nice. And then Mark asked me to do Midsummer Night's Dream.
But Mike, just before you go on, how big was your Cymbeline cast for the Globe?
5.
Oh, you did it as a small cast again.
Yes. So because I've seen the whole point, because somehow those 5 people meet in the right combinations, which allows you to have those actors playing all the way through. And of course, the wonderful thing about Cymbeline, which I think I already mentioned way back, is that in the last act, there's a huge number of reconciliations, and the characters on stage learn 27 facts, which the audience already know. And it's both funny and joyful and moving. And the play moved me very much because it's all about reconciliation and coming together. It's about joining. And I think that's what the play was about. It's belonging and joining and being together. Very celebratory. And the lovely thing was having 5 people, you know, duplicate and triplicate themselves and then dissolve back into 5 people constantly. And I had a very lovely cast. Mark was in it, of course, and John Ram, one of my very favourite actors, who I think I've mentioned a lot before. And they were all lovely, actually. And Jane Armfield was in it, and Abigail Thor, and oh God, another actor I can't remember, who was also very good, and it was very nice. And what was lovely, we got invited to the Brooklyn Academy of Music with it. And that, but between, and we were going out to look at the space the same week that the 9/11 atrocity happened. So we obviously were delayed a week in going out, and it was very strange to be in New York. It was like a ghost town. It was so quiet, you know, and it was a beautiful autumn. And we were staying in Brooklyn, and you could look across at, you know, at the 2 buildings, you know, the rubble of them, and there was still smoke going up, and lots of floral tributes and memorials and candles along the water's edge across. It was very moving and very distressing. And then we came back the following spring and performed there, where actually we got, on the whole, not very exciting reviews. but I mean, we had packed houses, and I did some workshops at the Actor Studio, the old Method Studio, which were very funny. Um, I did one on Shakespeare, which they got very exhilarated about, and they all stood up and moved around and used their bodies for once properly, and weren't sort of mumbling naturalistically. And then I was invited back to watch people do audition pieces. And there was a guy who was doing the opening of Richard III, and he sort of came on and sat in the chair and said, now is the winter of discontent make glorious, summer by the sun of York. It was meaningless. God knows what was going on. And I thought, Michael, don't say anything, because it was packed with members. And people would go, oh, he's trying very hard and how interesting. And then whoever was running that said, Mike, what do you think? And I said, well, look, first of all, it's not making sense. The text doesn't make any sense. Who is he talking to? Why is he saying it? What's going on? I don't understand anything. There's verse there. What? I mean, and the reaction from all the other people, oh, but he's trying and that's not fair. I cannot describe the defensive reaction I got. It was very, very funny, so they were so locked into rubbish, a lot of those actors. Anyway, so that was kind of very funny. And so then I came back, and before I did, let me just double check if I can, because I have to look at my schedule of, yes, sometime around then, no, actually, I think it was probably before I went to the Globe, I was invited to go back to Israel to do a production for the Camry Theatre. The Camry Theatre being the city theatre of Tel Aviv. And I decided I would revive my Demons and Dibbocks, the Isaac Bashevis singer short story things that seemed appropriate, and had a lovely a reunion with my long-time translator there called Rivka Mishulach, and she did a wonderful job. I had a really great group of actors who were very different in attitude to the people I'd worked with, all those years ago, and that they were more focused, more energized, and also had a reunion with a wonderful movement teacher, choreographer called Ruth Zeev. So that was a very pleasurable thing. We had long rehearsals, did a very beautiful production. It was slightly more elaborate because we were doing it on a big stage. And it opened to quite nice reviews, but the audience reaction was, what's that about? And you could feel that the whole tone of what theatre had sort of declined, had deteriorated. I went to see shows which were meant to be successful, and they were so vulgar, and they were crude, crass, and any sort of attempt at a sort of refinement or wit had gone. And that was very disappointing, And I don't think they got very big audiences for it. Although the actors' work was exemplary, it looked great. And it has a lot of class, and a lot of people who worked at the Academy said, oh, that work, it's really nice to see that sort of work. So there we are. So that was that experience. And that was the last time I worked in Israel. So anyway, so after Cymbeline, I did The Dream at the Globe. And excuse me. And Mark wasn't in this. And I was kind of excited by it. And Mark said to me, I can't wait to see what you'll do with the lovers. And I thought, oh, yes, relationships, that's very, very good. Anyway, I thought of doing it with my 3-year disbanded company at Method Madness. And I thought, if it's all about going to sleep, and I thought it'd be wonderful if the company come on in bedclothes, you know, pajamas and night dresses, and they've all got little mats, and they go to bed, and they have a whole series of whatever you have next to your bed, like tissue, you know, box of tissues, and your alarm clock and a book or whatever thing. So the actors that came on went to bed with Hippolyta and Oberon in the middle of the stage, and then they woke up. So they'd been in sort of bed together, and we went from there. But that convention never quite took off. I thought it would develop. So the whole thing was dreams within dreams. It was sort of there, it was and it wasn't. And the company were very good. I had some wonderful people in it. Geraldine Alexander and so forth, and Paul Higgins and John Ram again being bottom, and some lovely people. But the big irony being that what didn't work was the lovers, because I tried to make more logical sense of them than was possible. And I'd had this sense that how exciting to see people, characters in the dark, with actors trying to play as if they're in the dark in broad daylight. And the actors were devoted. They tried everything. I turned up the lights in the rehearsal room. I blindfolded them. They worked, and it never worked. And I realized I was pushing for something that Shakespeare had never intended. When it was dark, when he didn't want them to see each other, he decided they couldn't see each other. And when he wanted them to see each other, they saw each other, you know. And that was a big learning lesson about dealing with Shakespeare, because his whole sense of time and place and reality is very different from our conventions now. He uses what he needs at any moment, basically. And so a scene can actually move location without you realizing it. Things like that. And time can change without you, or two levels of time can be going on at the same time. Do you know? And that sort of flexibility was very thrilling to discover. Anyway, I did. It was all right. It got quite nice reviews. But I remember for some, God, I don't know, awful reason, I don't know whether it was malicious or, they decided having a matinee press night on a matinee, which they'd never done as far, and it poured with rain. So we sat in the rain in the middle, watching the actors sliding and slipping on the stage and trying not to fall over. Also, with Jenny Tiramani was my designer, a lovely woman who'd also worked with me on the Cymbeline and come to New York with me, just absolutely wonderful. And we devised then what was quite high tech 20 years ago. The actors had sort of dressing gowns or robes into which they'd inserted a whole lot of electric lights. It was a bit. They were wearing, you know those Christmas tree lightings that you can program and they flicker or they flash or so forth. And there were little wheels that you could turn and change the thing. So the poor actors had learned this, but of course you couldn't see them in the daylight, so that effect went totally. You wanted all this sort of glitter to go on, and what I did think the ending was very lovely, including the audience, because the great thing about the Globe was you play to the audience. You still keep it truthful, but you include the audience. And it requires a lot of techniques from the actors, which no other stage requires. You have to use the space quite differently. The central stage, where the big columns are, is the weakest place to be with, because they crush you. And you have to use the corners. And if you're playing to one corner of the audience, you have to turn your back on that near corner and play to the opposite corner. So you're including everybody. A lot of very technical, complicated things. It was very thrilling. So that was very nice. Anyway, I did it. And then I know.
Mike, let me interrupt you for a second there. You were talking about the staging, about being in one corner and having to then.
Yeah.
Did you stage it, or did you still?
What I did is the actors had to learn a series of lessons. We got on the stage as often as we could, and of course, an aside, getting on the stage is almost impossible because they have endless tours. You know, the education department makes a mint of money. So the yard with the theatre, it's always being used. There's always something going on. So you only get it officially for your technical days. You practically get no chance to be on that stage. Well, I demanded as much time as an hour here, an hour there. And I went on with the actors. So I exercised them, moving across the stage, using the columns, saying, if you get in the corner, this is what you must do. If you get over here, what's this area like up there? If, you know, and I had entrances, I used the original entrances then. And if you use the original entrances that Shakespeare, of a Shakespearean stage, it makes sense of people coming on and overhearing. You know, you suddenly realize the logic. Because, as we know, Shakespeare was a very practical man of the theatre. He was an actor, he was part of the company, and he knew what he was working with, you know, so that was very good. So that they had a language, they learned a language. And then they used that language appropriately, so they weren't blocked. But, you know, you dealt with the space in a certain way, and it was in you, it became instinctive to do things. The way I describe working on Handful of Dust, you know, when if you keep rehearsing a way of moving and talking and looking and sitting, it's there for you to use when you want it. Not saying, oh, on this moment, go down to that corner and then turn right or left or whatever it is. Yeah. And so you were doing a lot of sort of very easy swiveling in the space. I don't know. It was very interesting, and I love discovering those sort of rules. And so it was a great education. And the show, you know, because it's a popular play, it did all right. But you know, it was a bit of a disappointment for me because it didn't quite take off the way I hoped. Although everybody was doing pretty much what I asked them to do. My fairies were great. You know, the Oberon and Titania were good. There was a lot of physicality in it. The convention for the play within the play moved from the bathroom to from the bedroom to the bathroom. So all the Pyramus and Thisbe, they created props for themselves. I think the lion had a loose seat over his head with one of those, you know, fluffy bathroom mats, you know, and lots of, and I think shaving foam for beards and things like that. And I remember John Ram was ill during some of the previews, and Mark, who loves running on stage and improvising, took over a few days. And to begin with, the first night he came on, he played it like Marlon Brando with a sort of methody accent. And then he sort of got hooked on the shaving cream. And some nights, you know, the show was extended by 5 minutes, not always to its advantage, because it was very, very funny. It was fun, it was good, and they were very sincere, you know, and they played it very truthfully with all this stuff and things, you know. So that was, you know, and toilet brushes for things and, you know, whatever's in a bathroom, you know. Anyway, so none of that got really mentioned, which is interesting in the reviews. It's very often I think, well, that was rather special. I haven't seen like that, but I don't know. It's very, very weird. So all the ideas were there, you know. Anyway, there it was. And also what I did with the actors is, because they're running around, that they had different versions of their pajamas. They got more and more ragged and torn and disheveled as they went on. And I love the idea of sleep. I find it incredibly sensual and profound. And in rehearsal, it was like sort of nursery school. There were periods of the day I say, okay, you're all going to go to sleep now for 30 minutes and you're going to dream. And they did dream, which was wonderful, you know. And so when the lovers sort of wake out of their, you know, their drugged state towards the end, I think it's the end of Act 4, I spent a lot of time on them just waking up and the sensuality of that. But again, nobody took much notice of that. I liked it, you know, so, you know, waking up and so forth and so on. That was rather nice. And there was some very nice music. Claire wrote some very nice music, and I wanted it to be slightly Latin American in a way, so there was a sensuality to it. And we had a little orchestra sitting downstairs, and that was kind of nice. And the songs were nicely done, and little dances and things. Now I look back and it's better than I sort of ended up thinking about it, because of the response was sort of neither one thing or the other. You see, I suppose that's one of the problems. Having set up shared experience and having had 5 years or 6, 7 years of sort of raves on, about every show, you, you come, I think deep down yourself, you come to expect it. And if your show isn't less than magnificent and special, you're very worried. And I think that was also the problem with Method and Madness. The shows are perfectly good, but there we are. Don't worry.
I think, Mike, we're going to bring this little section to a close. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that chat. And if you did, would you press the like button, and also the subscribe button? That would be great. And if you wanted to be given alerts to when the next one is happening, just press the bell button. If you want to put any comments or any questions underneath here, underneath the video, please do. And at some point I will re-interview Mike, as it were, and put some of these questions to him. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.